The Fat Blond Girl. Mrs. Hanson, our fifth grade teacher, was sitting at her desk grading papers. We were all sitting at our desks. We were supposed to be writing paragraphs with one main sentence and three supporting sentences. I wrote down that my new kitten was soft, gray, and 10 weeks old. Whatever else I wrote had to be about soft, gray, and 10 weeks old. The fact that I couldn't teach it to go outside didn't match. The fact that if it went one more time on my mother's bed, I wouldn't have a kitten anymore didn't match either. I crumpled up my paper. I decided to write my main sentence about bratty little brothers. I could think of lots of supporting sentences for that. I had just started my new paragraph when the classroom door opened and a woman and a fat blonde girl walked in. Sharon sits behind me and I heard her say, "Ah." Diane sits beside me and she whispered, "I hope she isn't going to be in this room." The woman pushed the girl forward. "This is Elsie Edwards," she said. "How are you, Elsie?" Mrs. Hanson asked. "Fine," Elsie answered, looking at the floor. Elsie's mother leaned over her and tried to talk quietly to Mrs. Hanson. We were all staring silently, though, and heard every word. Mrs. Edwards told Mrs. Hanson that Elsie was on a special diet. She was not to eat anything except what was in her lunchbox. I thought to myself that it would take some special diet to melt off all that blubber. When Elsie's mother left, Mrs. Hanson walked the fat girl to the front of the room. Elsie's hips were so wide, her skirt brushed on the desks on each side of the aisle. As she walked by Jack's desk, he shrank back from her in horror. A few kids giggled. "Class," said Mrs. Hanson, "this is Elsie, our new student." "Gotta be kidding me," Roy muttered. "She's gross," Diane said softly. Elsie was gross. Her eyes were squished above her cheek bubbles of fat. Her chins rippled down her neck. She really didn't have a waist, except where her stomach bulged out below her chest. Her legs looked like two bed pillows with the ends stuffed in shoes. I knew everyone hated having Elsie in our room. Diane sits on one side of me, but the other side was the only empty desk in the room. My luck. Mrs. Hanson got some textbooks and brought Elsie to the empty desk. She said to me, "Jennifer, will you please show Elsie around the school at recess?" I tried to agree politely, but I didn't like having my recess ruined. I always play with Diane and Sharon, so when Mrs. Hanson left, I whispered to Diane that she could help show Elsie around too. Diane whispered back to forget it, so I was stuck with Elsie. I showed Elsie where the bathroom was. I showed her the office, the gym, and the library. After our trip around the school, I asked her if she wanted to play a tetherball game. She said she'd rather watch, so I left her and I went to find Diane and Sharon. Elsie leaned against the school building until the recess bell rang. In PE, Elsie told Mrs. Hanson she'd rather watch than play. Mrs. Hanson thought a minute and then said she supposed it would be all right for Elsie's first day. Elsie sat on the stage steps and watched us bombard each other in a soak-'em game. Elsie didn't just watch at lunchtime, though. She hunched over her desk and gobbled up her carrot, thermos of soup, and a pear in 3 minutes. When she was finished, she leaned across and asked me if I wanted my cornbread. Cornbread is the one thing the school cooks don't ruin. But I pulled my bread apart and gave Elsie a fourth of it. "Thanks," Elsie mumbled as she stuffed it into her mouth. While she was chewing, she looked at Sharon's lunch tray. Sharon was talking to Diane, who was holding her short black hair away from her face while she drank her milk from a straw. Elsie reached out and poked Sharon in the side. "Are you going to eat your dessert?" she asked. Yes, I am, Sharon answered, and turned back to Diane. Elsie put her thermos in her lunchbox and wadded up her paper napkin. She got up to throw her napkin in the wastebasket. On the way back, she stopped at Mary Ann's desk. Mary Ann's cornbread was on her tray. Mary Ann was watching Jack cut up milk straws for spitwad shooters. Say, are you going to eat your cornbread? Elsie asked. Mary Ann continued to watch Jack. Elsie didn't know Mary Ann's name, so she poked her in the arm. Are you going to eat your cornbread? Mary Ann, surprised, looked up at Elsie. She shoved the tray forward. No, take it, she said. Elsie stuffed Mary Ann's cornbread in her mouth and began to weave her way back to her seat. It was a close squeeze between Richard's desk and Jack's desks. Richard's book slid to the floor. Hey, watch it, Richard yelled. Mrs. Hanson looked up. As Elsie stopped to pick up the books, her skirt billowed behind her. Jack raised his hand to smack the huge target. Jack! Mrs. Hanson said sharply. Jack put his hand down slowly. Mrs. Hanson asked Elsie what she was eating. Elsie swallowed. Lunch. Whose lunch? Mrs. Hanson wanted to know. It's just some cornbread, Elsie said. Her cheeks had turned red, and the color dripped down her chins. Everyone was watching. Elsie, your mother said you were on a strict diet. In this room, you eat only what your mother puts in your lunchbox. Do you understand? Mrs. Hanson looked directly into Elsie's eyes. But I get so hungry, Elsie whimpered. She sneaked a look around the room. I didn't feel sorry for her. I was glad she was getting it. She was so gross. Elsie added, I only get some broth, a carrot, and a pear in my lunch. I'm sorry if you get hungry, Elsie, but this is something you'll have to take up with your mother and your doctor. Mrs. Hanson turned away from Elsie and told us to clean up the room. After lunch it was raining, so we couldn't go out on the playfield. Elsie stood against the school building again while the rest of us gathered under the covered area talking about her. Sharon said she should be in a circus, and Diane said she should be a garbage collector. I glanced over at Elsie while everyone giggled at the jokes. Elsie stood there silently, with the wind flapping her tent-like coat around her. I thought her mouth turned down sadly. When I got home from school, the whole kitchen smelled of chocolate chip cookies. I draped my wet jacket over a chair, opened cupboard doors until I found the stack, and helped myself to 4. Mother looked up from peeling potatoes. Jennifer! I put one back and sat down at the kitchen table to eat the rest. My little brother Kenny hovered around me, whispering, Me too, Jenny. So I figured Mother must have told him no more. When the whispering didn't work, he climbed up the rungs of my chair and patted my long hair. I broke off a piece of cookie and gave it to him. He gave me his pumpkin teeth grin in return. While I watched Mother cut up the potatoes, I told her about Elsie. I wonder why she eats so much, Mother said. I thought that was a strange question. Didn't Elsie eat because she was hungry?